When I announced my pregnancy, Mom laughed. Your sister's new house is the only good news today. Dad called my baby another burden. I said nothing and walked away. But 2 weeks later, one quiet decision put my sister's closing on hold and made my entire family ask, "What did you do?" My mother laughed before the sonogram even stopped moving. Not a happy laugh, a cold one. She held my baby's first picture between 2 fingers, studied it, dropped it next to grocery coupons. "Your sister just closed on her second house," she said. "That's the news this family should celebrate." My sister Vanessa sat under the lamp, blazer buttoned, gold key charm swinging off her purse. My dad didn't even look up from his recliner. "Great," he said. "Now there's another person we all have to worry about." My husband Mark's hand froze on my back, his fingers pressed in, just enough to say, "I'm here." I stared at the sonogram lying next to Mom's coffee mug, a tiny curved shape floating in gray. 2 days earlier, I'd cried watching that same shape flicker on a screen. Not from fear, from joy. Now it sat forgotten next to coupons. I said nothing. For 33 years, I defended myself in that house. Explained, justified, begged for one scrap of pride. Not tonight. I picked up my coat, took the sonogram with me. "Where are you going?" Mom snapped. "We haven't had dessert." "Home," Vanessa smirked. "Don't be so sensitive. They're just being honest." Dad grabbed the remote. "If you leave every time someone tells the truth, parenting's going to be hard for you." I tucked the photo in my coat. "You're right," I said. "I should be careful who gets access to my child." The room went dead silent. We walked out. Nobody said goodbye. What they didn't know, I wasn't just their daughter. I was their bank. For 6 years, I'd quietly paid $1,400 a month into my parents' household account, covered their taxes, their insurance, the roof, and Vanessa's empire, her self-made real estate business, built on my credit, my money, my signature on a personal guarantee for the very house they were celebrating tonight. She never mentioned that part at dinner. That night, I opened my laptop instead of crying. I do financial audits for a living. I know how to find what people hide. I typed one word at the top of a blank spreadsheet, exposure. Then I started pulling every document that tied my name to theirs. The guarantee I signed for Vanessa's new house had one condition. If her disclosures changed, I could walk. I dug through her file. An equipment loan, never reported. A lien notice on another property, never reported. None of it in the paperwork the bank had. I sat back. My hands were shaking. But not from fear. She'd built her whole image on being unstoppable. Turns out Unstoppable had a stack of unpaid bills behind it. Mark found me at 1 a.m., with tea going cold beside my keyboard. "What did you find?" he asked. "Enough," I said. I drafted a letter to the lender, requested a full review before funding closed, attached every hidden loan. Then I wrote a second letter, my resignation from managing the family trust, the one that had quietly funded my sister's entire career. Mark read over my shoulder. "You're sure?" "No," I said, "but I'm doing it anyway." I sent both letters before sunrise. 2 weeks passed. Nobody in my family called. No apology. No question about the baby. No text asking how I was feeling. The family group chat stayed busy, though. Mom picked kitchen colors. Vanessa posted a photo on the porch of her almost closed house. Smile wide for the camera. Caption, "Our family's next chapter." I watched the likes roll in. Said nothing. Then, on a Tuesday morning, while I was buried in a client file, my phone buzzed. Not my mother. The lender. 4 words on the screen. Funding on hold. I didn't move for a full minute. I just watched the words sit there, backlit, waiting for me to do something with them. Then my phone rang again. "Vanessa." I let it go to voicemail. It rang a second time before the first one even finished. Then a third. By the 4th call, I answered. "What did you do?" Not a question. An accusation wearing a question mark. "I asked for a disclosure review," I said. "That's all a guarantor is entitled to do." "You froze my closing, Claire." Her voice cracked on my name like she'd never said it before. 2 weeks. I have 2 weeks before the rate lock expires. Then I'd get those disclosures sorted quickly, I said, and hung up. My hands were steady. I noticed that, almost like I was watching someone else's hands. 6 months ago, I would have called back within 30 seconds, apologizing for a thing I hadn't even done wrong yet. Not this time. Not with a heartbeat under my ribs that depended on me having a spine. By that afternoon, my mother called. I let it ring twice before I picked up, because some old part of me still couldn't stand the guilt of a missed call from her. "Do you understand what you're doing to this family?" she said. "No hello, no how are you feeling. Vanessa's been building this for years. On my signature," I said, "with loans she didn't tell the bank about. Or me. She's your sister. She's also a business owner with an equipment loan and a lien she never disclosed on a legal document I'm bound to." "Those aren't the same thing, Mom." There was a pause. I could hear the television in the background. Some home renovation show, cheerful and oblivious. "You're doing this because we didn't clap for your ultrasound photo," she said. "This is spite." I closed my eyes, pressed my palm flat against the cool granite of my kitchen counter, the only thing in the room that felt solid. "I'm doing this," I said slowly, "because I found out the house you're celebrating is sitting on debts that could come back on me, on my child. I would have found this eventually, Mom. It just happens to be inconvenient timing for Vanessa that I found it now. You could fix this. One phone call to the bank and this all goes away." "It's not going away," I said. Not until it's honest. She hung up on me. First time in my life my mother had ever hung up first. I sat with the phone in my lap for a long time after that. Mark came in from the garage, saw my face, and didn't ask. He just made 2 cups of tea and set one down beside me, the way he'd done every difficult night since I told him I was pregnant. You okay? He finally asked. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but I'm not undoing it. The next call came from a name I didn't recognize. I almost let it go, thinking it was a spam number, but something told me to pick up. Ms. Whitfield, this is Denise Marsh, Senior Underwriting Officer with First Meridian Lending. I'm calling regarding the guarantee on file for the Cole property closing. 12 years in underwriting. She told me that within the first 90 seconds, the way people do when they want you to know they've seen everything and won't be rattled by whatever comes next. Her voice had the particular calm of someone who spent her days delivering bad news to people who thought they were entitled to good news. Your letter raised some items we weren't previously aware of, she said. Specifically, an equipment financing agreement with Cascade Business Capital and a recorded mechanics lien from a contractor named Delgado Restoration. Neither appeared on the loan application your sister submitted. My stomach tightened, even though I already knew. Hearing someone else say it out loud made it real in a different way. What happens now? I asked. We're required to reassess risk before funding can proceed, Denise said. Given the size of the undisclosed liabilities relative to her stated income, this may affect her debt-to-income ratio significantly. It could result in a requirement for additional collateral, a change in loan terms, or in some cases denial. And my guarantee? Under the terms you signed, material undisclosed debt at the time of application constitutes a triggering event. You're within your rights to request release from the guarantee pending our review. I hadn't realized I was holding my breath until I let it out. I'd like that in writing, I said, the request for release. I'll email you the form today, Denise said. Then after a pause that felt almost human, for what it's worth, Ms. Whitfield, it's unusual for a guarantor to bring this to us voluntarily. Most people find out the hard way after default. You may have saved yourself a significant liability. One more thing, Denise added before I could hang up. We'll need the lien satisfaction documents or a payoff letter from Delgado Restoration before any revised application could move forward. Contractor liens don't just disappear because a family member stops vouching for the debt. Someone still has to pay it or contest it. I told her I understood, though understanding and accepting were 2 very different things sitting in my chest at the same time. After we hung up, I pulled up the county recorder's site one more time and stared at the lien notice until the numbers blurred. $4,100, filed 11 months earlier, never once mentioned in any conversation Vanessa and I had had since. 11 months of holidays. 11 months of her showing up in that blazer, key charm swinging, telling anyone who'd listen how well things were going. I thanked Denise, hung up, sat in my kitchen with my hand resting on my stomach, feeling the first flutter I'd noticed all week. Probably just my imagination this early, the doctor had said, but it felt like something anyway, like a small vote of confidence. I decided that night I needed more than instinct and a spreadsheet. I needed someone who could make what I'd found undeniable, in a language banks and lawyers couldn't argue with. Raymond Cho had a corner office that smelled like paper and old coffee, the kind of place that made you trust a person before they said a word. 15 years as a forensic accountant, most of it untangling family businesses that had quietly rotted from the inside. Mark came with me. I think he was afraid I'd talk myself out of it if I sat in that office alone. I spread everything across Raymond's desk. The guarantee, the loan documents, the printouts from the county recorder's site, 6 years of trust account statements I'd pulled the night I couldn't sleep. Raymond didn't say much while he read. He had a habit of tapping his pen against his knuckle. 3 taps, pause, 3 taps, like a metronome keeping time on my nerves. I watched him work through 6 years of statements in near silence, occasionally sliding a sticky note onto a page, occasionally muttering a number under his breath like he was arguing with it. I thought about how strange it was to sit in a stranger's office paying $200 an hour to confirm what some smaller, quieter part of me had already suspected for years, that the money in my family had never moved in a straight line, that it pooled and diverted and vanished into accounts I wasn't supposed to look at too closely. I'd just never had the proof to say it out loud before. How long have you been managing this trust? Raymond asked without looking up. Since I turned 26, I said. 7 years. And in those 7 years, did you ever request quarterly statements independently, or did your father always provide the summaries? I felt my face go warm. He provided the summaries. Raymond nodded, unsurprised, the way a doctor nods at a symptom he's seen 100 times before. That's common in family trusts, where one party assumes the administrative burden early. It creates a blind spot the other trustee doesn't even know exists until someone forces a full reconciliation. He tapped the desk once, decisively. You did the right thing forcing it. Your trust distributions, he finally said, sliding one page toward me, show 4 withdrawals in the last 18 months, coded as business development advances to Vanessa Whitfield Cole. Do you recall approving these? I looked at the number at the bottom. $61,000. No, I said. I manage the trust. I never approve those. Who else has signing authority? My father. Raymond nodded slowly, like a man confirming something. I manage the trust. I never approve those. Who else has signing authority? My father. Raymond nodded slowly, like a man confirming something he'd already suspected. It's possible your father authorized these transfers without your knowledge, which would be a breach of the trust's co-signature requirement, assuming the document reads the way I think it does. He flipped to the trust agreement I'd brought, scanned it, found the clause in under 30 seconds. Here, distributions exceeding $10,000 require both trustees' signatures. I only see one. My throat felt tight. Not from surprise, exactly. Some numb, exhausted part of me had already suspected the money didn't just come from nowhere. I just hadn't let myself finish that thought until someone else said it for me. What does this mean? Mark asked. Practically? Practically, Raymond said. It means Ms. Whitfield has a legitimate claim for breach of fiduciary duty against her father as co-trustee, and potentially against her sister for knowing receipt of misappropriated trust funds, depending on what Vanessa knew and when. I'd recommend an estate and trust attorney before you do anything else. This isn't something you want to negotiate over Sunday dinner. He said it like a joke, but nobody laughed. I drove home with the reports in a folder on my lap, my hand resting on top of it the whole ride, like it might try to get away from me. Patricia Ellison's office was smaller than Raymond's, but she filled it differently. Sharp-eyed, direct, the kind of woman who'd clearly spent 20 years telling families things they didn't want to hear about the people they loved. I've handled probably 30 of these, she told me, after reading through Raymond's findings and the trust documents. Adult children discover a parent's been quietly draining a shared account for a sibling. It's more common than people think. Families don't like to admit money moves like water. It finds the path of least resistance. And usually that path is whichever child the parents feel guiltiest about. Guiltiest? I repeated. Vanessa's the one who never left, financially speaking. Some parents feel an obligation to keep propping up the child who can't stand on their own, even at the expense of the one who can. It's not always malice. Sometimes it's just decades of bad habits nobody corrected. She looked up at me. That doesn't make it legal or fair to you. I asked her what my options were. You can send a formal demand for accounting, which would require your father to produce every distribution record from the trust's origination. If the pattern holds, unauthorized transfers, missing co-signatures, you'd have grounds to petition for his removal as co-trustee, and possibly recovery of the misappropriated funds, plus interest. She paused. Or you can let it go and accept the trust will keep bleeding until there's nothing left for the beneficiary it was actually built for, which was me. I said quietly. And now my daughter. Now your daughter, Patricia agreed. That's usually the thing that decides it for people. It's one thing to forgive what was taken from you. It's harder to forgive what's being taken from your kid before she's even born. I signed the engagement letter that afternoon. Patricia drafted the demand for accounting that same week and sent it certified mail to my father, with a copy to Vanessa's attorney, since by then Vanessa had lawyered up too. A fact I only learned because Patricia's office got the response before I did. The rationalizations came fast after that, the way they always had in my family. Nobody apologized. Everybody explained. My father called on a Thursday night, his voice doing the thing it always did when he wanted to sound reasonable instead of caught. It was never meant to be permanent, Claire. Vanessa needed startup capital. We were going to pay it back into the trust once her business stabilized. With whose money? I asked. The trust doesn't earn interest sitting empty, Dad. You're twisting this into something ugly. I'm reading a bank statement, I said. The ugly part isn't my interpretation. It's the $61,000. He didn't have an answer for that. He just told me I was being cold, that pregnancy hormones were making me paranoid, that I should talk to someone about my anger issues before I raised a baby in that kind of environment. I hung up and sat very still, waiting for the old reflex, the apologize, the smooth it over, the make it okay for him, and it didn't come. For the first time in my adult life, I just let the silence sit there, unclaimed by guilt. 2 nights later, Vanessa showed up at my house unannounced. Mark answered the door. I heard her voice before I saw her, already mid-sentence, already performing outrage for an audience that hadn't asked for it. "You're trying to destroy me," she said, standing in my living room in workout clothes, mascara smudged like she'd been crying in her car before she rang the bell. "Do you have any idea what this does to my reputation? I have clients, Claire. Investors. If word gets out my own sister sabotaged my closing, I didn't sabotage anything," I said. "I asked a lender to verify information you were legally required to disclose. That's not sabotage. That's called honesty, and it's usually free. You could have called me first, given me a chance to fix it quietly." "I did call you," I said, 2 weeks ago. "You told me I was being sensitive about a laughed-at sonogram. I don't owe you a warning before I protect my own name from your debts." Her face changed then, the practiced hurt cracking into something rawer, uglier, more honest. "You've always been jealous of me. The perfect house, the perfect image. You couldn't stand watching me win. win, so the second you got pregnant, you needed a new reason to make everything about you. I felt something in my chest go very quiet and very clear, the way a room does right before a storm actually arrives. You used $61,000 of trust money that was meant for me, I said. You hid 2 debts on a federal loan application with my name attached to it, and you're standing in my house telling me I made this about myself. I opened the front door. Get your win somewhere else, Vanessa. This house isn't it. She left without another word. I stood at the window and watched her sit in her car in my driveway for almost 10 minutes before she finally pulled away, and I understood, watching her, that some cracks don't heal. They just wait for enough weight to finally split all the way through. The stress caught up with my body before it caught up with my mind. I'd been telling myself I was fine. Steady hands, clear head, doing what needed doing, but at my next appointment, my obstetrician, Dr. Renata Ose, took one look at my blood pressure reading and frowned. "This is higher than I'd like to see at 22 weeks, she said, wrapping the cuff back up. "Anything going on at home I should know about?" I gave her the short version. Family conflict. A lot of legal correspondence. Some sleepless nights. "I'm not going to tell you to avoid stress," Dr. Ose said, not unkindly. "That's not realistic advice for a human being with a life, but I am going to ask you to build in actual recovery time, not just powering through until you collapse. Sustained elevated blood pressure isn't something we take lightly in pregnancy. I'd rather catch this now than manage a bigger problem in the 3rd trimester." She scheduled me for more frequent monitoring, told me gently but firmly that whatever fight I was in the middle of, my body was already paying a toll it couldn't always show me in real time. I cried a little in the parking lot afterward, not from the appointment itself, but from the strange, disorienting realization that a stranger in a white coat had shown more concern for my well-being in 20 minutes than my parents had in 2 weeks. Mark held my hand across the console and didn't try to fix it. He just let me sit with it. "You don't have to carry all of this alone," he said eventually. "I know," I said. "I'm not sure I know how not to. Yet. The crisis peaked on a Wednesday, 11 days after the funding hold notice, when Patricia called me with a voice that had lost its usual courtroom calm. "Your father's attorney sent over the trust's distribution ledger," she said. "It's worse than what Raymond found. There are 2 additional unauthorized transfers he didn't have records for, smaller amounts, but they push the total past $90,000. And there's something else." She paused, the kind of pause lawyers use when they're deciding how much cushioning a piece of news needs. "One of the transfer authorizations has your signature on it, except you didn't sign it." The room tilted slightly. "That's not possible. I would remember authorizing $90,000. "I know," Patricia said, "which means someone forged it or someone digitally reproduced it from another document. I've flagged it for a forensic document examiner before we file anything further. If it's confirmed, this moves from a civil trust dispute into potential fraud, and depending on which state statute applies, that could mean criminal referral." My hands were shaking again, but for a different reason this time. Not fear of confrontation, fear of how far this actually went. "There's a time-sensitive piece too," Patricia continued. "Vanessa's closing has a hard deadline. Her rate lock expires in 24 hours. If the lender doesn't get a resolution on the guarantee and the disclosed liabilities by tomorrow at 5, the entire deal collapses and she loses her earnest money, roughly $18,000, along with the rate lock. Your father's attorney is pushing hard for you to sign a release stating the trust discrepancies are resolved internally to keep the closing alive. I want to be very clear. If that signature is forged, signing anything today that characterizes this as resolved could compromise your ability to pursue it later. 24 hours. I sat with the phone against my ear and felt the floor of my life narrow down to a single unbearable choice: protect my sister's closing or protect the truth of what had actually been done with my name. "Don't sign anything," Mark said quietly, standing in the doorway. He must have heard enough of the call to understand. Not under a deadline they created. "I know," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. I called Patricia back within the hour. "Get me the forensic document examiner today," I said. "I'm not signing a release for something I didn't authorize just because someone else's deadline is inconvenient." The examiner's name was Louis Fontaine, a man who'd spent over 20 years testifying in fraud cases, calm in a way that only came from having seen every version of denial a person could offer. He compared the disputed signature against 6 known exemplars of mine within 4 hours. Using overlay analysis and stroke pressure comparison, he explained more patiently than I probably deserved, given how many times I made him repeat it. "This isn't a forgery in the traditional sense," Louis told Patricia and me over a video call the next morning, less than 3 hours before Vanessa's rate lock was set to expire. "It's a composite. Someone took a genuine signature from an earlier trust document, likely scanned, and digitally transposed it onto the transfer authorization. The pen pressure inconsistencies and the flattened baseline are consistent with an image transfer, not a live signature. Can you tell who did it?" I asked. Not definitively from the document alone, Louis said, but whoever prepared that authorization had access to both the original signed document and the software to manipulate it. That narrows the field. Whoever prepared that authorization had access to both the original signed document and the software to manipulate it. That narrows the field considerably. Patricia's jaw tightened. The authorization was drafted and filed by your father's home office computer, based on the metadata in the digital file we received in Discovery. He'd have had access to a scanned signature page from the original trust formation documents. I thought of my father sitting in his recliner 2 weeks earlier, telling my mother another person to worry about, while somewhere in the house, on his own computer, my name had already been quietly lifted and pasted onto a document authorizing nearly $100,000 he had no legal right to move. I didn't cry. I'd expected to. Instead, something in me went very still and very sure. File it, I told Patricia. All of it. The breach of fiduciary duty, the forged authorization, everything. And send formal notice to the lender that the guarantee release stands, unconditionally, and that I will not be signing anything characterizing this matter as resolved. That will almost certainly end Vanessa's closing today, Patricia said, giving me one last chance to reconsider. I know, I said. It should have ended the day she decided not to tell me the truth. The closing collapsed at 4:51 p.m., and 9 minutes before the rate lock deadline. Denise Marsh called to confirm it herself, her voice carrying something that might have been quiet respect. The file's been withdrawn, she said. Given the pending fraud allegations tied to the trust and the unresolved undisclosed liabilities, we couldn't have funded regardless of what happened with the guarantee. For what it's worth, Ms. Whitfield, banks see a lot of families implode over money. Very few of them handle it with this much documentation. It made our decision considerably easier. Vanessa lost her earnest money, lost the rate lock, and within a week lost something bigger. Her real estate brokerage license came under review after 2 of her business clients, having read about the fraud filing in a small item that ran in the local business section, filed their own complaints about undisclosed liens on properties she'd brokered for them. The state licensing board doesn't move fast, but once it starts moving, it doesn't stop for family loyalty. My father was removed as trust co-trustee within 6 weeks, after Patricia's petition and Lewis's signature analysis were entered as exhibits in probate court. The judge ordered a full accounting and repayment schedule for the misappropriated funds, with interest, structured over 4 years. My father didn't look at me once during the hearing. My mother didn't come at all. The forgery finding went to the district attorney's office as a mandatory referral, given the trust document requirements under state law. Whether it resulted in charges wasn't something I controlled, and honestly, by that point, I'd stopped needing it to. The truth was already out. Everyone who mattered already knew what had happened, in exhaustive, notarized, undeniable detail. My mother texted me once, 3 weeks after the closing fell through. "You've torn this family apart over money." I looked at that message for a long time before I answered. The family was already torn, I wrote back. I just stopped pretending the seam was whole. She never replied. My daughter was born on a Tuesday morning in March, 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that made the delivery nurse laugh out loud. Dr. O.C., who'd monitored my blood pressure through every appointment after that difficult visit, told me afterward that everything had gone about as smoothly as a first delivery could go. "You did good," she said, adjusting my daughter's blanket. "Both of you." Mark cried before I did. I remember that clearly, the way his whole face just opened up, unguarded, the moment they set her on my chest. Nobody from my side of the family came to the hospital. No flowers, no text asking her name. I named her Adelaide, after no one in particular. A name that belonged only to her, with no history attached, no expectations baked in before she'd even opened her eyes. 6 months later, the trust repayment was on schedule, monitored by a court-appointed accountant Patricia had insisted on. Vanessa's license review concluded with a 2-year suspension and a fine that, according to the state board's public record, she was still paying off in installments. She'd moved out of the house she never actually closed on and into a rental across town. We hadn't spoken since the night she stood in my living room and called me jealous. My parents sold their own house 18 months later. The taxes I'd been quietly covering became suddenly, glaringly unaffordable once I stopped. I heard about it secondhand, through a cousin who still spoke to both sides. I didn't call to help. I didn't call to gloat either. I just let it happen, the way gravity happens, without needing my permission. Patricia's office closed out the trust accounting formally last spring, 2 years after that first sleepless night with the spreadsheet. The final report showed full repayment plus interest, every dollar of the $90,000 accounted for, initialed, notarized, filed. I framed nothing from that case. I didn't want a trophy. I just wanted the number to reach 0. And it finally did. I sit with Adelaide most evenings on the back porch Mark built the summer she turned 1, and I think, sometimes, about the sonogram my mother dropped next to a coffee mug like it meant nothing. I think about how certain some people are that love is a currency you spend on the child who performs the best, the biggest house, the loudest win, and how wrong they are, and how long it took me to stop trying to earn what should have been free. I didn't set out to destroy anything that night. I opened my laptop at 1 in the morning. I only wanted the truth written down somewhere nobody could argue with. It turned out the truth was enough all by itself. My daughter will never know a version of this family that required her to be quiet about being loved. She'll never sit at a table wondering if her existence is an inconvenience wedged between somebody else's good news. That's the only inheritance I ever really wanted to give her. If you made it this far, you already know what it cost to stop being quiet. Hold on to that.